this is not about India. This is all about Ukraine. And this is about Trump's brand. He wanted to stop the war on day one. It hasn't happened. Russia has been frustrating him. China has been frustrating him. And now, unfortunately, very unfortunately, he has added India to those pack of countries that is aiding the Russian war. And that is where we are. This has got nothing to do about trade.
Rao, this has definitely assumed a geopolitical dimension with, of course, some BRICS countries actually retaliating against Donald Trump's alleged unilateral trade and tariff policies. In fact, China has earlier called it bullying as well. But let me go back to Swami, sir. Swami, sir, you were talking about the China factor. Where do these tariffs really put India with respect to China, most importantly? And how does this really impact the China Plus One story that's been, turning out rather well for the past couple of years?
The Chinese immediately took it up. They said, we are not going to stand for this. So, in other words, they were determined. They saw from the start, trying to deal with this particular man, doing it in a gentle way will not work. So they went absolutely the limit. They say, if you impose 145, we impose 145. And because Chinese economy is important to the USA, this in effect meant cutting off trade on both sides. So at that point, the United States had to come down. The whole point is China had something to offer in the sense of saying, okay, I will also come down from 145 and I will finally accept some kind of tariff on my thing, a low tariff, after negotiation. India is not in a position to give up anything at this point. That is its weak point. If you merely say, I will reduce the import duty on bourbon, whiskey, and a couple of other things, that is not enough. He has decided that he is going to make a geopolitical issue of oil. And on oil, we cannot afford, in my view, to give in to him. It will mean a huge increase in import prices, which will affect us adversely in various ways, including high inflation on fuel and all the consequent things. It would hugely depress the Indian economy too. So in my view, at this point, what do you have which you can give up? You can all that. If you have high retaliatory tariffs like China has, you can say, I give this up. But if you don't, are you going to give in on the import to genetically modified maize and wheat? I am in favor of GM, so I wouldn't mind that. But I know for a fact that the government will never accept that. So if you're not willing to accept those things, I do not think you will be able to get a deal with Mr. Trump just by saying, I will cut the import duty on bourbon whiskey. You will need much, much more on agriculture, which is, I do not think the BJP can possibly accept. And he wants a cut in our oil imports from the source and making us buy from expensive sources. I do not think that will work for us. So the notion that there is any easy ground for a deal, there is no easy ground for a deal. If there is no easy ground, we have to rethink everything and say we made a mistake. From the start, we should have been tough like China, even though our negotiating position is not that strong. But even now, I would say go ahead, levy high tariffs, and let them then come back to us on that. As with China, ultimately, they worked it out after both sides had raised their tariffs. I would say go ahead and do that. At this point, you have been punished in a way which nobody else has. Japan delayed things, EU delayed things. None of them was penalized seriously. We, however, are being penalized very seriously. And for something that has nothing to do with the opening thing, which was supposed to be reciprocal tariffs. So are we going to be bullied? I mean, one is the foreign policy issue of, we do want to have a line out to Russia because it has been a good supplier of defense in the past and it's been useful. So there is a foreign policy aspect that we must keep that option line or that line open. But far more important, I think, is the economic issue. Why should we undergo a 50% increase in our oil prices by giving up Russia and saying we will not allow anybody to buy from Russia, we'll only buy from the Gulf, etc. And we will send the price shooting up because we are a huge importer.
But Mr. Swamy, let's say India chooses to double down and chooses to continue to, retaliate, with the US. Do you possibly think that this could be a gamble that the country could ill afford? As it is, there seems to be only one way this discourse with the US side is going in terms of one tariff being imposed on another. Is this a gamble that you feel India can take and can afford more specifically at this time and place? And what happens in the event of a continued logjam between both the US and India? What's the way out thereafter?
You will be able to get out once both sides feel that there is something, we are hurting the other side in some way. And we can tell the USA, something like, I may be willing to subject myself to some quota that I will buy from the USA or somewhere. But I'm not going to be dictated that I'm going to buy no oil from Russia. I badly need that oil, and I do not want to treat Russia as an enemy. And that's a fundamental of foreign policy too. So I said economic and foreign policy. You say on this I am not going to give way. Then what else will you give way on? You don't want to give way on farming? I said the only other thing is like China. I said, okay, I impose a huge tariff upon you. And as part of a deal, I can remove that. That is the only thing you will have to bargain with. Otherwise, you have nothing to bargain with. And all the tariffs will remain in place. Trump doesn't give a damn. If Indian inflation goes high and India has a recessionary impact, he doesn't care. He says, okay, go through you. I just want to collect large import duties from you like I'm collecting from the other guys. What happens to your economy is none of my concern. So I would say at this point we have to say that all the assumptions of the initial soft approach have turned out to be wrong. So let us completely change and get ourselves something which we can actually give up as part of a deal. And the only thing we can give up at this point, as far as I can see, is a high retaliatory tariff.
Swami sir, in fact, India has previously maintained, as well as government sources have told ET now that, of course, we will be looking at diversifying our trade. This is something that India has been consistently doing. The latest one coming in from Philippines, the president currently is visiting. And, of course, both countries have a PTA or a preferential trade agreement. That announcement was made, in fact, just 2 days back as well. But let me go to you, Mr. Mishra. Now, Swami sir is stating that there's no easy ground on the deal. So are we back practically to square one on negotiations? And could India have afforded to have a strong position as far as bargaining is concerned, like China?
So I think the escalation with the United States is, of course, something that I think that it was not premeditated from the very beginning. I think it because as a part of the negotiation with the 5 rounds of talk that happened, I think there was significant confidence, at least on the Indian side, that there will be a reached. Now, there is absolute travesty in hyphenating the idea that India stop oil and the war between Ukraine and Russia stops. I think that a hyphenation is something that's a gimmick. It is something that's out of thin air. Because it entirely depends on Russia's stance. Today Witkoff visited Moscow. He had a bilateral with Putin, and to my imagination, I don't think there is anything substantial that comes out of it, because the grounds on both on the Russian side and the Ukraine side are pretty clear. Now, coming back to India, if India, the option is that if there is a doubling down of 50% tariff, 25 and 25 additional. Then I think virtually Washington is signaling that trade with India will be difficult. And so naturally, as a country, you will have to think of options of how you domestically signal in terms of taking a stance and how you diversify in terms of economic, creating soft grounds for landing and diversify. Now, unlike, if you look at Brazil, for instance, they have been tariffed at 50%, but they've taken a very aggressive stand against the United States in terms of rhetoric, etc. I don't see that happening with India, because I think the conversation it's important that India realizes that the conversation happens. But meanwhile, retaliatory tariffs as an option is, I'm sure, a thought within the government. And that process may have begun in terms of how to identify areas where if we go on with retaliatory tariffs, then what are the sectors that we should go bang on?
Right. Mr. Rao, if I could quickly come over to you now. Now, as far as the Indian markets are concerned, and specifically the export sector, if hypothetically India were to tackle this issue by looking at newer markets, perhaps Latin America, South America as well, how quickly, in terms of a timeline, do you think the country and its industries have what it takes to make this pivot and look at other options so as to ease the blow? Is that something viable at this time and place? And how quickly do you see a turnaround time taking effect with regard to this pivot itself that India might want to look at as a contingency measure against these tariffs?
The most valuable exports from India worldwide obviously are in the pharmaceutical sector and, of course, the diamond industry. So that is where I think India has a potential to reach out to other markets. In fact, frankly, I would say that those are the two industries that will make Trump want to reconsider some of these tariffs. There may not be a blanket tariff, and there may be other things that he could potentially do, like he has done with Canada, where in the USMCA agreement, he has gone very hard on Canada, but he has exempted, for example, the automobile sector in part because of the agreement. So I'm still hoping that Trump will negotiate with India about the pharmaceuticals, because, as you know, the pharmaceutical sector is very important to his base here in the US. So drug prices are high, and the Health and Human Services Secretary has repeatedly said that he does not want Americans to pay very high drug prices. So my immediate concern is if the tariffs don't work. I mean, if the tariffs are imposed on India the way they are now, where will America go to source those pharmaceutical or diamond imports? So I don't think everything is over yet, but that's where we are.
Right, Mr. Rao, and remains to be seen what kind of tariffs is Donald Trump going to announce so far as pharma and semiconductor. Those two sectors are concerned. We did hear from Donald Trump yesterday when he was stating that 150% will be the beginning of tariffs on pharma, and that could also go up till 250%. It remains to be seen whether these tariffs are going to be tenable at all, sustainable at all. Swami sir, I want to ask you about the markets tomorrow. I mean, a sea of red was seen in the markets earlier when Trump announced tariffs. Now, which sectors do you expect to get impacted the most, and what's your reading on FII activity for the ongoing quarter?
I am not sure whether the markets will have any clear idea of what do we do. There remains the possibility, for instance, if India holds firm if India does not hold firm and gives way, for instance, on Russian oil, there will be a huge increase in the price of oil. That will affect all the users of oil in various different ways. Some perhaps positively, but most of them negatively. Because that would be I mean, even if you accepted any kind of quota and saying, okay, I will only buy so much of Russian oil and not endlessly. Nevertheless, it would mean, I think, you'll be putting pressure on non-oil production and prices will go up. So I think that is one factor they will have to take into account. I think the fact that relationships between the two countries have turned out to be much worse than before, it is a definite negative for the FIIs. So I think, they've been pulling out, and I think they will continue to pull out. That will be a negative. The fact that the relationship between the two countries has gone down so sharply in ways people had not expected, this has to be a negative for something.
Mr. Mishra, if I could just bring you in on this. What is the scope for, a possible TACO approach? That's something we haven't quite spoken about in great detail as yet. The understanding is that the Trump will always chicken out approach could also be an option that the Indian side could explore in terms of an announcement being made with regard to tariff imposition, the US stock markets reacting adversely to it, and which would then lead to a subsequent reversal, of the US president's stance vis-a-vis, said proposed tariff in the first place. Do you feel there's scope for India to simply dig its heels deep and hope that Trump will eventually chicken out or taco out, so to speak?
So I think we better not mention it, because if Trump hears this, he might go the other way. Now, there's been extensive writing in the U.S. media on the taco business, and we've seen Trump come hard at that narrative. But eventually, in practice, he's done that quite a few times, and therefore that term. But my sense is that the first July deadline was something that Trump did not hold on to and pushed it to August, and therefore the taco narrative really caught on with him. And therefore, he saw August 1 as, the August deadline is the final deadline, because if he slipped that even further, then that narrative would have grown strong. And, Trump is somebody who cares so much about his personal image and identity. So I think, but the fact that if you keep the conversation on with the United States, which I think India is doing, and because there's a slated visit of the U.S. team to India this month, I do remain I do have optimism in this regard that we might be able to strike some kind of a deal, although you might have to give more concessions than you initially imagined, which was 15%. But even 15% would be quite high in terms of how that positions on the Indian economy. But I do think that Trump is very capable of changing his stance. We've seen that even despite the fact that he's stuck to the August 1 deadline for the rest of the world, he gave Mexico a leeway. I mean, and that too for 90 days, 3 months. So it's very much possible that Trump pushes the boundaries if he reaches the right kind of narrative, and if he has something of a placard that he can show to the world vis-a-vis the India-US relationship that he managed to galvanize.
Right, Mr. Mishra, but even as we speak, we did hear from the Ministry of External Affairs earlier this week, and it stated that India will take all necessary measures to safeguard its national interest and economic security. This is something that several ministries have reiterated over and over again. So it remains to be seen how these negotiation talks will proceed and whether there's going to be any sort of negotiations that will happen on August 25th. As of now, we're given to understand that negotiations are definitely underway virtually, and of course the US side is expected to visit India on the 25th of this month. Remains to be seen the kind of concessions that could be given from India while protecting its national interest, and of course what the United States could be open to. Let me come to you on that point, Swami sir, since we've been speaking of the BRICS forum, and could we then be looking at a Russia-China axis coming even closer now to counter Trump's aggressive posturing, perhaps just out of strategic necessity? All right. I'll request Vivek, if you could take that question, since Swami sir is going to be joining us in a short while. He's not on air right now.
So I think the Russia-China axis is something that has concerned the United States broadly since the Russia-Ukraine war started, and there's been the axis growing between Russia and China. Now, for Trump, the question really is the BRICS, and he has come out in open and said that it's part of the reason why I'm putting these tariffs is because of the BRICS. They're ganging up. They're talking about de-dollarization, while India has made particularly clear that de-dollarization is not something the New Delhi seeks. So I think that there's been that clarity. But Russia and China, of course, they both see an opportunity. Russia is an economy that's closing the gap with the US in terms of the economic heft. Also, in terms of technology, it has leapt ahead of the US in many areas in AI and semiconductors. And it also sees this opportunity, this global fracture, as really an opportunity to band together with some other countries and create new supply chains to Latin America, to Africa, and so on and so forth. And there's always been some colonial and anti-imperialist resistance from certain geographies to the United States. So that all conjoins with the idea of how, for instance, in Africa, the whole entire coup belt, you saw colonial countries like France get out because of domestic pressure. Those are the areas that I think China gains a narrative in. Russia has an advantage over the United States, historically speaking. And this fracture particularly gives them the opportunity to create a different axis on which they can work together, be it on supply chains, be it on finances, be it on mutual financial issues, mutual trade. And then you have everything that is going on in the Middle East, with countries like Iran and North Korea in the East, really coming together in terms of a group of countries that is opposed to the United States, that is opposed to the idea of the global governance and systems that we have since the Second World War. So I think you have that fracture of the global order that is even getting wider with the conflicts that are raging on, and particularly now with the tariff situation that we have in Washington.
Right. Mr. Rao, if I could quickly come back to you. Mr. Mishra was talking just a little while ago about the taco equation of this all, and how there's actually a very real possibility that President Trump might, well, change his stance, like he's done several times before, making an announcement, a proposal, then going back on it. Now, should that be a possibility this time around too? Do you see there could be any chance at all that the Indian markets also adopt a wait and watch mode with regard to going about reacting to the announcement of the 25% additional tariff, and that the markets here could also, for all you know, well, dig its heels deep and wait to see if there's more clarity that eventually emerges in what is no doubt an environment of uncertainty right now? Is there a universe in which Indian markets adopt a more of a wait and watch approach in response to the announcement?
That's a great question. There is one thing we have known about Trump. Nothing has happened until it actually has happened. So we still have a few days leeway. I would say that an important indicator here, unrelated to even tariffs, is about this B1 beta visa bond issue. As you know, there was a statement recently made by the Secretary of State that it was also entered in the Federal Register that in 15 days' time, they're going to publish a list of countries where B1 and B2 visa holders that came to the US have overstayed. I did some research and I found that India is on that list of top 10 countries privately when I did the research. But the announcement will be made only 15 days from now or 12 days from now. If India is on that list, then that means that the abyss has widened. But if India is not on that list, that could be a positive sign. So to your question, I would say the Indian markets really have to wait and see until the tariffs actually have hit and actually they have begun collecting them at the customs ports. I don't think it's over yet.
So, Mr. Rao, you're suggesting that there's not going to be an overreaction and perhaps the markets will be in a wait and watch mode. We'll have to see how the markets react tomorrow for the exact reaction. On that note, thank you very much, Mr. Rao and Swami, sir, for your expert insights and joining us live on this broadcast. And even as we speak, a reaction from the Indian side is awaited. Of course, a measured policy approach is something that India has taken so far. It remains to be seen what's the approach that it's going to take now, given that negotiations between the United States and India are still ongoing. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we conclude this broadcast, and we're slipping into a very short break, but lots more coming up on the other side. You don't go anywhere.